The valet had already gone. I parked my own car at the far edge of the gravel lot, wiping my palms against my burgundy dress, trying to smooth out the creases that had deepened during the tense drive. The flat tire had set me back nearly an hour, and by the time I arrived at the vineyard, the sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds. "You've got this, Rachel," I whispered to myself, checking my makeup in the rearview mirror one last time. At 63, I had learned to apply just enough foundation to soften the lines around my eyes without looking like I was trying too hard. My silver stray hair was pinned neatly at the nape of my neck. Elegant but not flashy. Samuel always said I looked best when I kept things simple. The weight of the gift bag swung at my side with each uneven step across the gravel. Inside was a quilt I'd spent 2.5 months creating, stitching together pieces of fabric that held our family history, a square from Samuel's baby blanket, another from his college graduation gown, even a piece from the dress I wore when I first met his father, all wrapped in cream paper and tied with a burgundy ribbon. Their wedding colors. I remember double-checking with Isla's mother about the color scheme months ago. Laughter floated from the patio, clear, high, polished. Followed the sound around the side of the building, not wanting to barge through the front doors during a toast or a dance. Small group had gathered near the fire pit. Champagne flutes raised, faces glowing in the soft light. "Thank God she didn't come," someone said. It was Isla, my new daughter-in-law, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. The group laughed. I froze behind the hedge. "Means well," Isla added with a dramatic sigh. "But she's just a lot more." Laughter. Someone said something about energy. Another about the vibe. And then Samuel, my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father left. When he was just 7, laughed too. He didn't say my name. He didn't defend me. Just smiled. Turned to kiss Isla's temple and raised his glass. I stood there, silent, my hand clenched around the handle of the gift bag until my knuckles ached. The wind shifted, lifting the corner of my shawl and brushing their words deeper into my ears. I stepped back, careful not to let my heels scrape against the gravel. There was a bench by the parking lot. I sat there for a long time. I don't remember how long, just the sound of distant music and someone calling for the next toast. My phone vibrated in my purse. Jessica, my neighbor, checking if I'd made it safely after helping me change the tire. I didn't answer. Eventually I stood. Didn't drive away. I walked in through the side door, the one near the kitchen, where the staff barely looked up. My heels clicked softly against the tile as I moved toward the reception hall, past trays of hors d'oeuvres and servers huddled by the espresso machine. I kept my shoulders square and my eyes steady. Inside the room sparkled, gold accents, floating candles, laughter bouncing off every wall. I searched for my table. There were 10 of them, maybe 12, arranged in a circle around the dance floor. I passed by each one slowly, scanning the little folded cards. Nothing. No Rachel Young, no mother of the groom, not even reserved. I didn't ask for help. I just found a chair near the wall beside a column of ivy-wrapped fairy lights and sat. I placed the gift bag on my lap and kept both hands on it like I was shielding something delicate. Maybe I was. They played a slideshow not long after the first course. Baby photos, school plays, beach vacations. Isla's childhood filled half the screen. Her parents beamed from ski lodges and lakesides. I waited for the familiar frames I had sent in. Samuel with his missing front teeth holding up his 3rd grade spelling trophy. asleep on my shoulder on a bus to Virginia. None of them appeared. I watched closely. Every photo that had once included me had been cropped, trimmed, reframed. One could even see my elbow in the corner, quickly replaced with a floral transition slide and a trumpet swell of music. The room applauded. Clapped once, maybe twice. Later, when the toasts began, Isla's mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Samuel stood to speak, voice warm and easy, and thanked everyone who helped us become who we are. He didn't look in my direction. The first dance followed. Samuel twirled Isla gently. Then he danced with Patricia Phillips, Isla's mother. Slow practice sway. Everyone smiled. No one came to my chair. Not a word, not even a glance. But I stayed. Because I needed to see how far they'd gone without me. I remember the day I sold my wedding ring. It was spring, the kind of late March day that still smelled like frost. I walked into a small jeweler 2 towns over with my hand clenched in my coat pocket. And when I opened it, the man behind the counter looked at the gold band and gave me a number. He nodded. I didn't cry. I just thought of Samuel standing on that college lawn months from now. Acceptance letter in one hand, future in the other. That money covered his deposit. He never knew. As I sat alone at the wedding reception, these memories flooded back, not as a weapon to hold against him but as a simple truth I carried. The weight of years spent choosing him first. I sewed his prom suit myself the night before. Midnight, the dining table covered in fabric, pins in my mouth, coffee going cold beside me. He had asked late, said he didn't want to go, but then changed his mind when his friends found dates. I never told him how tired I was. He just smiled and ironed the lapel straight. When Isla was accepted to that internship in D.C. 3 years ago, Samuel said she needed a new wardrobe. Professional, he called it. I stayed up until dawn, piecing together a capsule set, 3 skirts, 2 blouses, a fitted coat. Wrapped them in tissue paper and folded them neatly into a suitcase I bought secondhand. She thanked me then, casually, like I'd picked something off a sale rack. The wedding came and I sent in my contribution quietly. A deposit for the venue, paid directly. No receipt in the binder, no mention in the speeches. I didn't care. Told myself I wasn't doing it for recognition. I just wanted to make sure they had the start they dreamed of. But now, sitting alone in the back of this room, watching a slideshow that edited me out, surrounded by flowers I partially paid for and faces that didn't miss mine, I wondered maybe I did want a thank you or a glance or even just my name spoken out loud. The music shifted. A new couple arrived and took the chairs beside me. They didn't ask who I was. I didn't offer it. Beautiful ceremony, wasn't it? The woman said to her companion. Not to me. I nodded anyway. The bride's family really went all out, the man replied. I hear they're quite well connected in Chicago. Thought about mentioning my contribution to the flowers that adorned every table, the deposit I'd paid for this very room. Words formed in my mouth, but dissolved before they reached my lips. What would be the point? A server approached with champagne. She offered glasses to the couple next to me, then started to walk away. Excuse me, I said quietly. Turned surprised, as if noticing me for the first time. Could I have one too? Please. My voice sounded foreign to my ears, too polite, too small. Oh, of course, ma'am. I'm sorry. She handed me a glass, the apology in her eyes making clear I was invisible until I spoke. I didn't drink it. I just held the cool glass between my palms, watching the bubbles rise and disappear. Like me in this room, like me in my son's new life. The cake cutting came next. I remembered asking Samuel about flavors months ago. He'd said Isla was deciding. I'd offered to connect them with Mrs. Bennet, who'd baked every birthday cake Samuel had ever had. He'd said they'd found someone more modern. The cake was 5 tiers of white fondant with gold leaf. Beautiful, but I knew without tasting it that it would be dry inside. Samuel never liked fondant. He always peeled it off as a child, preferring the buttercream beneath. I wondered if he'd mentioned that to Isla. I wondered if she knew that he secretly loved corner pieces because they had more frosting, or that he always licked the spoon when we baked together, even as a teenager, even when he pretended to be too cool. For baking with his mom, they cut the cake together, his hand over hers. The photographer, one of Isla's cousins, directed them to feed each other bites. Samuel smeared a bit on Isla's nose and the crowd laughed. They looked happy. They looked complete. I slipped the gift bag under my chair. Maybe I'd mail it later. Maybe I wouldn't. I didn't sleep that night. I took off the dress, hung it back up carefully, and left the gift bag on the entryway table. Thought, maybe, just maybe, someone would call. Maybe there'd be a message, a small one. Thank you, even out of politeness. Nothing came. The next morning the wedding photos were already online. Isla's mother had posted an album titled Our Perfect Day. There were over 200 photos. Isla in lace, Samuel in gray. The venue glowing in sunset light, guests laughing, dancing, toasting. I scrolled through them slowly. First I looked for myself. Then I looked harder in the group shots, the wide angles, the background of the cake cutting. I wasn't in a single frame. There was one photo, blurry, taken from a distance, where I could just barely see the outline of my shoulder. I recognized the brooch I'd worn, but even that was cut off by a clever crop. Closed the tab. Noon. I called Samuel. The line rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. I told myself I didn't know what to say, but the truth was I didn't know how to ask for acknowledgement without sounding desperate. I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I'd stored the RSVP card, the one I'd never sent back. Isla had delivered it by hand weeks earlier, along with a firm look in a printed schedule of events. I took it out, smoothed it flat on the counter, slid it back into its envelope and sealed it. Then I reached for a strip of clear tape and pressed it across the flap. Not angry, not bitter, just done. I placed it in the drawer with the old sewing patterns I no longer used. Turned off the light and boiled water for coffee. The doorbell rang just after 3 o'clock. For a moment, one foolish, hopeful moment, I thought it might be Samuel. Instead, Jessica Harper stood on my porch, a plate of brownies in her hands. "Thought you might need these," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. 70. Jessica moved with the confidence of someone who had stopped caring what others thought decades ago. Her silver hair was cut in a practical bob, and she wore jeans with an oversized sweater despite the warm May afternoon. "The wedding was yesterday?" she asked, though she knew perfectly well it was. She'd helped me pick out my dress after all. Yes, I took the plate and headed to the kitchen to make tea. Jessica followed, and she prompted, settling herself at my kitchen table like she'd done 1,000 times before. It was beautiful. The lie fell easily from my lips. Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Rachel Young, I've known you for 15 years. Don't you dare lie to me." The kettle whistled. I busied myself with mugs and tea bags, keeping my back to her. They didn't have a place for me, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. No table, no introduction, no acknowledgement. What? Jessica's voice sharpened. Samuel didn't do anything. I interrupted, turning to face her. That's precisely the problem. He stood there while his wife toasted to my absence. He danced with her mother instead of me. My voice broke and I pressed my lips together. Jessica was silent for a long moment. Then she pushed out the chair across from her. With her foot. Sit, she commanded. And tell me everything. So I did. Told her. About arriving late, about the conversation I'd overheard, about the slideshow and the missing place setting. I told her about the venue deposit and all the other times I'd given quietly without recognition. I sound pathetic, I concluded, staring into my cooling tea. No, Jessica said firmly. You sound like a mother who loves her son more than he deserves right now. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was cool and dry against mine. What are you going to do about it? She asked. I shook my head. What can I do? He's made his choice. Nonsense, Jessica snapped. You didn't raise that boy to treat people this way. Especially not you. I can't force him to want me in his life. No, she agreed. But you can stop waiting at the window for scraps of his attention. I smiled weakly. Is that what I'm doing? You know, it is. Jessica squeezed my hand. Listen to me, Rachel. I lost David 10 years ago. The difference between us is that I didn't have a choice about being alone. You do. David, Jessica's husband of 40 years, had died suddenly of a heart attack while mowing the lawn. I'd been the one to call the ambulance when Jessica screamed for help. I'd sat with her at the hospital and helped plan the funeral. I knew what real loss looked like. It's not the same, I protested. No, it's not, she agreed. What Samuel is doing is a choice, and you need to make one too. She stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at my small garden where spring bulbs were just beginning to emerge. Remember when Margaret's daughter tried to put her in that awful nursing home? Jessica asked, changing the subject abruptly. Margaret was another neighbor, a widow in her 80s who lived 3 houses down. Of course, I replied. Her daughter wanted to sell the house, Jessica nodded. And what did Margaret do? I smiled, remembering. She joined that senior advocacy group and found out her daughter couldn't legally make her move. Then she transferred the house into a trust. Exactly, Jessica said, turning back to face me. Margaret didn't sit around feeling sorry for herself. She took action. I understood what Jessica was trying to say, but my situation felt different. Samuel isn't trying to take my house. No, he's taking something more valuable. Your dignity, your place in his life. Jessica returned to the table. Oh, ask you again. What are you going to do about it? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. After Jessica left, I stood at my own kitchen window, watching as the shadows lengthened across my small backyard. The garden needed attention. The fence needed painting. 4 years, I'd been meaning to create the kind of outdoor space I'd always wanted. Pergola with climbing roses, perhaps. Or a small pond. But there had always been something more important. Samuel's tuition, Samuel's apartment, Samuel's wedding. That afternoon, I opened the windows and for the first time in weeks, I sat down. Without checking my phone, I watched dust motes dance in the sunlight and listened to the neighbors' wind chimes. Thought about Jessica's question. What was I going to do? The answer came. Slowly, like dawn breaking over the horizon. I would stop waiting. I started. Walking each morning before the heat settled in. Just up the road past the old post office and the church with the peeling white shutters. My joints protested at first, but I welcomed the ache. It was a kind of conversation, my body reminding me I was still here. I brewed black coffee when I got home. Strong, hot, no sugar. I drank it on the porch, legs tucked under the same quilt I'd once planned to give them. The gift bag still sat by the front door. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. First, I reached for my phone out of habit. I would scroll, checking if Samuel had posted anything new. And I stopped, not out of spite but exhaustion. The quiet felt cleaner. Didn't message. I didn't comment. I let my side of the line go still. The second, Thursday after the wedding, I walked past the community center and saw a flyer taped to the window. Textile. Workshop beginners welcome. I pulled the tab with a number and signed up the next day. It was a small group for women, one man, and a young girl, no older than 20, who said she wanted to learn real sewing, not TikTok stuff. I brought my own needles and wore the thimble my mother had given me. Instructor Olivia Waters was younger than me, maybe early 50s, with arms covered in colorful tattoos that peeked out from her rolled-up sleeves. Her gray hair was strewn with purple, and she spoke with a kind of confidence that made everyone lean in to listen. Sewing isn't just about joining fabric, she told us. On that first day, it's about joining stories. Every piece you create carries your energy, your intention. The man in our group, Marcus Jenkins, laughed at. I just want to fix my own jeans, he said. Olivia smiled. Start with the practical, end with the magical. That's the way it always goes. I liked her immediately. After class I stayed to help clean up and ended up volunteering to teach a session the following week on quilting techniques. They asked what name I preferred on the sign-up sheet. I paused a second before writing it. Rachel Young, not Mom, not Mrs. Young. Just me. In the evenings I cooked what I liked. I let dishes sit in the sink overnight if I didn't feel like scrubbing them. I lit a candle some nights, not for anyone else, just 'cause I liked the flicker. The phone stayed quiet. They didn't ask where I'd been. They didn't seem to notice at all. And still, each day felt a little more vain. The kind of day I hadn't made space for in years. Mrs. E. Halpern mentioned it in passing, while we were both weeding the shared strip between our yards. She's glowing, she said, squinting toward her phone screen. Lauren posted the announcement this morning. You must be over the moon. I didn't answer right away. I pressed my thumb into the dirt a little deeper and nodded like I'd known all along. The post had gone up hours earlier. I hadn't seen it. I hadn't been tagged. There was a photo later when I looked it up myself of Samuel and Isla standing in front of a whitewashed fence holding a tiny pair of sneakers between. The caption read, "Coming this fall, 3,000 likes, dozens of comments. No mention of a grandmother." I sat on my backsting, dirt under my fingernails, thinking about this new person who would share my blood, but perhaps not my name. Would they crop me out of their photos too? Would they even take photos with me? The quilt I'd made for the wedding still sat by the door. I retrieved it now, unwrapping it carefully, running my fingers over the stitches. In that moment I decided I would make something new, not for Samuel and Isla, but for the child, something they couldn't edit out or replace with something more modern. 2 weeks passed before Samuel called. The number lit up my screen around dinner time. I let it ring twice before answering. He said. I heard. Isla's voice faintly in the background, laughing at something. "How are you?" he added. "Fine," I replied, the word crisp and clean between us. We were wondering if maybe you'd make something for the baby." I swallowed, looked at the bundle of fabric on my kitchen table. A new project, a memory quilt for a woman whose sister had passed. Each square cut from old dresses and choir robes for the nursery, he continued. Isla thought it would be sweet, sentimental. I could hear the practiced tone in his voice, like he was trying to sound casual but not too casual, like he'd rehearsed this call. I folded one of the fabric squares carefully before I spoke. "I don't sew for people who celebrate when I'm not in the room." The silence that followed didn't sting, just settled. "I see," he said. "Finally. Do you?" I asked, surprising myself with the directness of the question. Another pause. "Mom, if this is about the wedding." "It is," I confirmed. "But it's also about the years before that and all the years that will come after." "I don't understand." His voice had an edge now. The same defensiveness I'd heard when he was a teenager caught in a lie. "You will," I said eventually. We said goodbye soon after. No mention of visiting. No invitation to help with the nursery or attend the baby shower that would inevitably be planned. Just a quiet conclusion that felt more like a beginning than an end. That night I pulled out the envelope, marked estate documents and took my time reviewing each line. I removed a name, added a note, initialed the bottom corner. When I was done, I brewed a second cup of coffee, stronger than usual, and watched the sun lower itself over the back fence like it had nowhere else it needed to be. I ordered the new mailbox plate on a Thursday. It arrived in a slim brown package, neatly wrapped. The letters etched in brushed steel are young. I stood by the curb with a screwdriver in one hand and the old plate in the other. The original had read the Youngs for decades. A leftover from when I thought being part of something meant never being forgotten. The new one fit perfectly. No fuss, no resistance. When I stepped back to admire my work, I noticed Denise Carter from the sewing class walking her dog on the opposite side of the street. She raised her hand in greeting and I waved back. "New mailbox," she called out. "Moo." "Everything," I replied, and she nodded like she understood completely. Denise was in her early 50s, recently divorced after 30 years of marriage in class. Worked with a quiet determination, unpicking and resewing seams until they met her standards. She reminded me a little of myself, careful, precise, unwilling to settle for good enough. "Coffee," I offered, gesturing toward my porch. She hesitated, then nodded. "Got 20 minutes before I need to be on a work call." We sat on my front steps, 2 mugs between us, her small terrier settling at our feet. "I like the new plate," she said, glancing back at the mailbox. "Clean. Felt like time," I replied. "Isn't it always?" Denise smiled, but there was understanding in her eyes. "My therapist says we often know what we need to do long before we actually do it." I nodded, thinking of the wedding gift still sitting inside, of the RSVP card sealed with tape, of all the times I'd chosen silence over truth. "My son and his wife are having a baby," I said. He said, the words falling into the space between us. "Congratulations," Denise said automatically, then paused. "Or not," I laughed, a small surprised sound. "I don't know yet." That same week, I launched the Etsy shop. Just a simple page, threads by R. Young, photos of quilts made from choir robes, denim jackets, birthday dresses, each one stitched with care and story. Orders came slowly at first, then steadily, and then without needing to ask, 2 women from the sewing center asked if I'd mentor them. One was Denise. The other was a young mom who whispered that sewing was the only thing that made her feel like herself again after her twins were born. I said yes without hesitation. On Saturday mornings, we worked in the corner of the community room near the windows. I taught them how to bind corners, how to match threads to memory. We didn't talk about husbands or children unless we wanted to. Some days we just sat and let the hum of the machines fill the silence. Have a gift for this, Denise told me one morning as she watched me demonstrate a particular stitch. Not just the sewing, teaching. I felt something warm unfurl in my chest. Pride maybe, or simple pleasure in being seen. I've had a lot of practice, I said. Samuel used to sit at my feet while I worked, asking 1,000 questions. It was the first time I'd mentioned him to the group. Denise's hands stilled over her fabric. Your son? She asked. He nodded. He used to love watching the machine. Said it sounded like a tiny train. The memory was sweet, unmarred by recent events. Held it carefully like the delicate thing it was. Will you teach your grandchild? Denise asked gently. Didn't answer right away. Question hung between us. Neither heavy nor light, just present. If I'm allowed to, I said finally. Denise reached over and squeezed my hand. Her touch brief but firm. We returned to our work, the machines humming, the morning light shifting across the table as the hours passed. I'll continue with part 2 of the story, aiming for approximately 5,000 words and following the successful storytelling structure from the attached file. A month later, a reporter from the local paper visited the community center. He was writing a piece on local artisans for the Sunday supplement and asked to interview me. He began with polite questions. How I got started. What inspired me. The story behind. Threads by R. Young. So, you're a mother too? He asked casually, glancing at a photo on my phone, one of the few I'd kept visible showing Samuel at his high school graduation. Smiled not unkindly. I'm a creator, I said. He wrote that down verbatim. And when the article came out the following weekend, that line was the headline. I'm not someone's mother. I'm a creator local. Artist weaves new identity. I clipped it and taped it above my sewing table. Not for pride but for proof. The kind of proof I no longer needed from anyone else. By the end of the month, I had 10 orders pending and a waiting list each. One unique. A memory quilt made from a late husband's ties. A christening gown fashioned from a wedding dress, a wall hanging created from concert t-shirts too precious to discard but too worn to wear. Olivia approached me after class. One Thursday, her tattooed arms folded across her chest. You're outgrowing us, she said, but her smile was genuine. Never, I replied. The community center board wants to know if you'd consider teaching a weekly class, she continued. Paid position. They've had inquiries since that article ran. I hesitated. The instinct to defer, to minimize, rising automatically. I'm not sure I'm qualified. Olivia interrupted, holding up one hand. Rachel, I've been teaching textile arts for 15 years. You have a gift. Own it. I thought of the mail I'd received that morning. An invitation to Isla's baby shower addressed in Patricia Phillips' flowing script. Not her daughter's hand. No personal note. No acknowledgement of my absence from their lives these past months. Just a printed card with registry information and a request to RSVP by phone. I hadn't called. Right, I said to Olivia. When do I start the next day? I found a manila envelope in my mailbox. No return address. just my name printed in a hand I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter from Thomas Warren, the bank manager where I'd worked as a teller for nearly 20 years before retiring last spring. "Dear Rachel," it began. "I hope this finds you well. I recently came across some old photos while clearing out my office and thought you might like to have them. Enclosed were several photographs from company picnics and holiday parties. Me at my desk laughing with coworkers. Me receiving an award for 20 years of service. Me at the retirement party I'd barely attended, wanting to rush home to finish the alterations on Isla's bridal shower dress. At the bottom of the envelope was a business card with a handwritten note. I saw your article in the paper. Your work is beautiful. Perhaps we could have coffee sometime." I remembered Thomas. Quiet professional, always kind but slightly distant in the way supervisors often are. He'd lost his wife to cancer a few years back. I'd sent a condolence card with a small quilted bookmark enclosed. Nothing elaborate. I didn't think he'd even noticed. I set the card on my kitchen counter and went about my day, thinking I'd respond later. As evening fell, I found myself picking it up again, running my thumb over the embossed letters of his name. I wondered what had made him reach out now after all this time. The next morning I called the number on the card. "Rachel," Thomas said, his voice warmer than I remembered from our office interactions. "I'm glad you called." We met at a small cafe downtown the following afternoon. Thomas had aged well, his hair was fully silver now, but he carried himself with the same quiet dignity I remembered. He wore a blue sweater over a crisp white shirt, no tie. Retired life seemed to suit him. "Hope you don't mind me reaching out," he said after we'd settled with our coffees. "When I saw your article, something just clicked. I always admired your work ethic, but I never knew about your artistic talents. They were always there," I said. "Just background for a while." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Life has a way of doing that, doesn't it? Pushing parts of ourselves to the side while we focus on what seems more urgent. We talked for over an hour about my new teaching position, about his volunteer work with a literacy program, about the shifting nature of identity after careers end and children leave. Not once did he ask about Samuel or my family. It was as if he sensed that boundary without needing to be told. As we were preparing to leave, he hesitated, then said, "I'd like to commission a piece if you're open to it, a wall hanging for my daughter's new something with elements from her childhood." I felt a spark of excitement. "The challenge?" "I'd be honored," I replied. "Tell me about her." Walking home, I felt lighter than I had in months. There was something freeing about being seen as a person separate from my roles, not as Samuel's mother or a retired bank teller, but as an artist with skills worth commissioning. That evening, I started sketching designs for Thomas's wall hanging. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mom, it's Samuel. Please call when you can." I set the phone down and continued sketching. An hour passed before I finally picked it up again and dialed his number. "Mom," he answered on the first ring. "Did you get the shower invitation?" "I did," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Are you coming?" He sounded nervous, almost childlike. Took a breath. "Don't think so, Samuel." Silence stretched between us, taut his thread. "Is this still about the wedding?" he asked finally, frustration edging into his voice. "Because if it is, it's not just about the wedding," I interrupted. "It's about respect. It's about being erased." "Erased, Mom. No one's erasing you." I closed my eyes, remembering the cropped photos, the missing place setting, the toast to my absence. Samuel, I said quietly. I saw the photos. I heard what was said when you thought I wasn't there. Another silence, this one heavier. That was Isla was just joking. It didn't mean anything. Meant something to me. I heard him take a sharp breath. So, you're punishing us by not coming to the shower, punishing your grandchild before they're even born. The manipulation was so transparent, I almost laughed. The old me would have backpedaled, would have apologized, would have shown up with a handmade gift and a smile, pretending nothing had happened. Instead, I said, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm choosing how I spend my time. And with whom. When you and Isla decide to treat me with basic respect, we can revisit our relationship. This isn't like you, Mom, Samuel said, his voice hardening. You've changed. Yes, I agreed. After we hung up, I sat at my sewing table for a long time, hands perfectly still on the fabric before me. I was aware of a strange doubling sensation, grief for the relationship we'd had, and a quiet, growing certainty that its ending might be necessary for something new to begin. I returned to my sketching, but the lines kept blurring. Finally, I set the work aside and pulled out a fresh piece of fabric. Soft cream-colored cotton, perfect for a baby's sensitive skin. Began cutting shapes without a pattern, working by instinct and memory. By midnight, I had the beginnings of a small quilt, not for Isla's shower, not even as a gift to be acknowledged, but as a silent promise to a child I might never know. 2 days later, Jessica appeared at my door with a folder tucked under her arm and a determined expression. We're going out, she announced. I have orders to finish, I protested. They'll wait, Jessica said, already turning back toward her car. This won't. Curious despite myself, I grabbed my purse and followed her. We drove in silence to a small cafe on the other side of town. Not the one where I'd met Thomas, but a newer place popular with the college crowd from the community college. What are we doing here? I asked as we claimed a table by the window. Jessica didn't answer immediately. She ordered coffee for both of us, then carefully opened the folder she'd brought. Do you remember when you helped me organize David's papers after he died? She asked. He nodded. We'd spent weeks sorting through insurance policies, investment accounts, and property deeds. David had kept meticulous records, but the sheer volume had been overwhelming for Jessica in her grief. You taught me something important, she continued. You said, always know what you have so others can't tell you what you don't. She slid a piece of paper across the table. Was a printout of an email exchange between Samuel and someone named Kyle Bennett. The subject line read, Riam's house. My stomach tightened as I skimmed the contents. Samuel was asking this Kyle, apparently a real estate agent, about property values in my neighborhood, specifically my home's potential worth if it were to be updated and put on the market soon. Where did you get this? I asked, my voice barely audible. Jessica's eyes were steady on mine. Margaret's grandson works at that real estate office. He saw Samuel's name and remembered him from when he used to mow your lawn in high school. Read the email again, hoping I'd misunderstood, but the words were clear. Samuel was exploring selling my house. My house, which was fully paid for, which had been my anchor for 30 years, which I had no intention of leaving. This doesn't mean I began but couldn't finish the thought. Maybe not, Jessica conceded. But coupled with this, she handed me another printout. This one from a social media post by Isla from 3 months ago before the wedding. Os. Hunting again. Sam thinks we should consider his mom's neighborhood. So much potential with those older homes. Especially when they're inherited #future plans #real estate dreams. Coffee Jessica had ordered arrived. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, needing its solidity. They're assuming. I'll leave them my house. Said slowly. That's why they invited me to the shower. They're worried I might change. My will. Jessica didn't confirm or deny. She didn't need to. Evidence was clear enough. What else is in that folder? Yes. Information, Jessica replied, passing me several more pages. About living trusts, about estate planning, about protecting your assets so they go where you want them to go. Margaret's not the only one who can be strategic. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, mechanically completing one of my commissioned pieces while my mind churned through what I'd learned. By evening I'd made a decision. Called the lawyer whose card Jessica had included in her folder, and made an appointment for the following week. At night, I dreamed of my house being emptied room by room, furniture disappearing, walls being stripped bare. While I stood in the garden, unable to move or speak. I woke at dawn, sheets tangled around my legs, heart racing. I made coffee and sat on my back steps, watching the sunrise paint my small garden in golden light. The rose bushes I'd planted when Samuel was 10 were blooming, their scent sweet in the morning air. The bird feeder he'd built in 7th grade woodshop hung from the old maple tree, weathered but still functional. This place held my history. Not just as Samuel's mother, but as Rachel Young. The woman who taught herself plumbing when the bathroom sink leaked and there was no money for a professional. The woman who'd painted every room herself, choosing colors that made her happy. The woman who'd created a home, not just a house. I would not let it be taken for granted. Not by Samuel, not by Isla, not by anyone. Later that morning Denise called. Are you free for lunch? She asked. Just finished a project I think you'll appreciate. We met at a small deli near the community center. Denise arrived, carrying a tote bag which she placed carefully on the table between us after we'd ordered. I want to show you something, she said, reaching into the bag. She pulled out a folded piece of fabric, a quilt square, beautifully executed with a complex pattern I recognized as a variation of the broken dishes design. It's lovely, I said, running my finger along the precise stitching. It's the first of 12, Denise explained. I'm making a quilt, chronicling my divorce. Each square represents a different stage of the process. I looked more closely at the pattern. Broken shapes reassembled into something new. Orderly but with visible seams where the pieces joined. This is the beginning, Denise continued. When everything first fell apart, she smiled ruefully. Hence broken dishes. Powerful, I said, meaning it. What will the final square be? I don't know yet, she admitted. I'm living my way to it, one day at a time. The waitress brought our sandwiches and we ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Denise spoke again. Got a letter from my ex-husband's lawyer yesterday. She said he wants to renegotiate the settlement. Says he can't afford the payments we agreed to. I knew from our previous conversations that Denise's ex had left her for a younger colleague, claiming he needed a fresh start. The divorce had been contentious with arguments over everything from their shared business to the family dog. What will you do? Asked. Denise straightened her shoulders. I'll fight, she said simply. I earned my share of our life together. I won't let him rewrite that history. Her words resonated with my own situation. Another attempt to rewrite history, to recalculate value, to dismiss contribution. I told her about the emails Jessica had discovered, about Samuel and Isla's apparent plans for my house. What will you do? Denise echoed my question back to me. I thought of the lawyer's appointment, of the sealed RSVP card, of the new name on my mailbox. I'll fight too, I said, just more quietly. We finished our lunch. Two women planning battles on separate but parallel fronts. As we were leaving, Denise touched my arm. Rachel, she said, remember that broken dishes can become something beautiful, but only if you're the one doing the reassembling. I carried her words with me as I walked home, turning them over in my mind like smooth stones. The idea that brokenness could be not just repaired but transformed, not erased or hidden but incorporated into a new design, felt both challenging and hopeful. Home. Found another text from Samuel. Mom, Isla really wants you at the shower. It would mean a lot to her, to us. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I pulled out the baby quilt I'd started and continued working. Each stitch a small act of reclamation. I would finish it. Not for the shower, not as a public gesture, but as a private one, a way of acknowledging the child without compromising my own boundaries. As evening fell, I finally replied to Samuel. I wish you both well with the shower. My gift will arrive separately. His response came quickly, so you're really not coming? It wasn't a question, so I didn't treat it as one. I set my phone aside and returned to my sewing. The next day, Thomas called to check on the progress of his daughter's wall hanging. Our conversation was easy, meandering from art to books to his recent trip to visit his grandchildren in Arizona. Before hanging up, he hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" "Nothing fancy, just dinner." I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. We arranged to meet the following weekend at a small Italian restaurant downtown. I spent more time than I'd like to admit choosing what to wear, eventually settling on a deep blue dress I'd made years ago but rarely worn. It had pockets and a neckline that flattered without revealing too much. Felt good in it, confident in a way that had nothing to do with who might be looking. Thomas was waiting when I arrived, standing when he saw me approach the table. His smile was warm, his eyes appreciative without being invasive. "You look lovely," he said simply. Dinner was pleasant, the food excellent, the conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. Thomas told me about his late wife's battle with cancer, about the grief that had nearly consumed him afterward, about his slow journey back to something resembling normally. The hardest part, he said, twirling pasta around his fork, was figuring out who I was without her. We'd been together since college. I'd never really been an adult on my own before. I nodded, understanding completely. It's strange, isn't it? How we can lose ourselves in relationships. Even good ones. Especially good ones, Thomas corrected gently. The better the fit, the less we notice where they end. And we begin. After dinner, we walked along the Riverwalk. The summer evening, warm around us. When Thomas took my hand, it felt natural, not a demand or a claim, just a connection. "I'd like to see you again," he said as he walked me to my car. "I'd like that too," I replied and meant it. Home, I found another text from Samuel. "You've made your point. Mom, Isla's really upset that you're missing the shower. Can we talk?" I sighed, the pleasant glow from my evening with Thomas fading. Type response. "I'm available tomorrow afternoon if you'd like to come by." Setting the phone down, I noticed a notification from my Etsy shop, a new order, and a review from a recent customer. Rachel's work is extraordinary. She didn't just make a quilt from my mother's clothes. She captured her essence in every stitch. True artist. I read it twice, letting the words sink in. Artist, creator. These were identities I was growing into. Separate from but informed by all that had come before. They couldn't be taken away or diminished by Samuel's disappointment or Isla's anger. The next day I waited for Samuel to arrive. I'd made coffee and set out the blueberry scones he'd always loved, not as a peace offering but as a simple hospitality. When the doorbell rang at 3 o'clock, I took a deep breath before answering. Samuel stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking more boyish than his 30 years. For a moment I saw him as he'd been at 10, at 15, at 20, always a little uncertain behind his bravado. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Samuel," I replied, stepping back to let him in. He entered cautiously, glancing around as if expecting changes. But the house looked much as it always had, perhaps a bit tidier, with more fabric samples on the dining table and a new organizational system for my thread collection, but essentially unchanged. "Coffee?" offered, leading him to the kitchen. "Sure." He sat at the table, fidgeting with a napkin. "You've been busy, I hear. Jessica mentioned your Etsy shop is doing well." I poured coffee for both of us before sitting across from him. "It is," I confirmed. "I'm teaching classes at the community center now, too." "That's great, Mom." "Really?" His smile seemed genuine if strained. Happy for you." I waited, letting the silence prompt him to get to the real purpose of his visit. "Look," he said. "Finally, I know you're upset about the wedding and maybe we could have handled some things better, but this thing with the baby shower feels like you're punishing us." "I've already told you." "Not punishing anyone," I replied evenly. "I'm making choices about how I spend my time and energy, but it's your grandchild," Samuel insisted. "Don't you want to be involved?" "Course I do," I said. "But being involved doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It doesn't mean pretending the wedding never happened or that I wasn't deliberately excluded." Samuel's expression hardened. "It wasn't like that. It was just Isla was stressed, and her mom took over a lot of the planning. Things got overlooked." "I wasn't overlooked, Samuel. I was erased." Kept my voice calm. "There was no place for me at the reception. My photos were cut out of the slideshow, and you and Isla toasted to my absence by the fire pit." His face palled. "You heard that?" "Did." "I arrived late because I had a flat tire." "I heard every word." Samuel looked down at his coffee cup. "It was just a joke," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It wasn't funny," I replied. "And it wasn't the first time I felt unwelcome in your new life." He didn't respond immediately. When he looked up, there was a calculation in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Is that why you changed your mailbox and started all this?" He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "Independent stuff." The way he said independence like it was a phase, a rebellion, made something harden inside me. "No, Samuel. Changed my mailbox because I am independent. I always have been. You just never noticed because I made it look easy." "And what about the house?" he asked, the question coming too quickly, too sharply. There it was, the real concern. Not my absence from the shower, not my feelings about the wedding, but the house, my home. "What about it?" I asked, watching him closely. He shifted in his seat. "I just mean you're getting older." This place is too big for one person. Isla and I were thinking. I know exactly what you and I were thinking, I interrupted. I've seen the emails to Kyle Bennett. I've read Isla's posts about inherited homes and future plans. Samuel's face flushed. You're spying on us. No, but people in this town talk. And you were careless. He stood up abruptly, coffee forgotten. So that's it. You're cutting us off, changing your will, all because of one stupid joke at the wedding. I remained seated, keeping my voice level. I'm not cutting anyone off, Samuel. I'm establishing boundaries. And yes, I am reviewing my estate planning as any responsible adult should. This isn't like you, Mom, he said, echoing his words from our phone call. You've never been selfish before. The word hung in the air between us, revealing more than Samuel probably intended. In his mind, my self-determination was selfishness. My boundaries were barriers. My independence was abandonment. Think. You should go, I said quietly. Mom, we can talk again when you're ready to see me as a person, not just as a resource. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, hands wrapped around my cooling coffee cup. There was pain, certainly a deep ache for the relationship we'd had and might never recover. But beneath it was something else, a certainty that I'd done the right thing, spoken the truth that needed speaking. The house was quiet around me, but it no longer felt empty. Felt like mine. I rose and went to my sewing room. The baby quilt waited. Nearly finished now. I would complete it, not as a gesture of reconciliation, but as a promise to myself, and to the child who would someday enter this complicated family, that love could exist even in the spaces between understanding. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Thank you for a wonderful evening. Looking forward to seeing you again. I smiled, finishing the final stitches on the quilt. New patterns were forming, both in fabric and in life. Not perfect, not without visible seams and occasional knots, but intentional, chosen, mine. I'll write part 3 of the story, extending it to approximately 6,000 words and following the successful storytelling structure from the attached file. That same week, I launched a website for Threads by R. Young, expanding beyond Etsy to showcase my larger works. Olivia helped with the photography, arranging each quilt against neutral backgrounds that highlighted the textures and colors. Marcus, the man from our sewing group, who initially just wanted to fix his jeans, turned out to be a web designer and offered to build the site at a discounted rate. You're going to need a proper portfolio, he said, adjusting the lighting for a particularly intricate memory quilt. These pieces tell stories. They deserve to be seen. My first class at the community center filled up within hours of being announced. The second and third quickly followed. What had begun as a solitary practice was becoming something larger, a community, a business, an identity separate from the roles I'd held before. The baby quilt for Samuel and Isla's child sat wrapped in tissue paper on my workroom shelf. I'd finished it, but hadn't sent it, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps the right mindset, to let it go. One morning in late August, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with my name and address handwritten in an elegant script I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of matching stationery. Dear Mrs. Young, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Caroline Bennett. I believe our children are connected. My son Kyle has been working with your son Samuel regarding real estate matters. I recently read the article about your textile work in the local paper and recognized your name. I'm reaching out because I have a rather unusual request. My mother passed away last month and I've inherited a collection of her clothing that holds great sentimental value. I understand you create memory quilts and wondered if you might consider taking on this project if you're amenable. Perhaps we could meet to discuss the possibility. My number is below. Sincerely, Caroline Bennett. I read the letter twice, trying to place the name beyond Kyle's mother. Caroline Bennett sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately recall where I might have met her. Curious, I called the number provided. Warm voice answered on the third ring. Caroline Bennett speaking. Hello, this is Rachel Young. I received your letter about a possible commission. Rachel, thank you for calling. There was genuine warmth in her voice. I wasn't sure if you'd respond given the circumstances. Circumstances? I asked, puzzled, a slight. Perhaps we should meet in person. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? We arranged to meet at Westfield Garden Cafe, an upscale restaurant on the other side of town. I hadn't been there in years, not since a retirement dinner for one of the bank managers. It was the kind of place where lunch often stretched to 2 hours, and the waitstaff knew fine wines by vintage. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in one of my better outfits, a slate blue dress with a handmade scarf I'd woven myself. The hostess led me to a quiet corner table where a woman was already seated. Caroline Bennett rose as I approached. She was perhaps a few years older than me, elegantly dressed in cream linen, her silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob, but it was her eyes that caught me, sharp, intelligent, and somehow familiar. Rachel, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. It's been a very long time. Shook her hand, still trying to place her. I'm sorry. Have we met before? She smiled slightly. Briefly, very briefly, at Westridge High School, 1978. I was Caroline Winters. Then I dated James Young for about 6 months before he met you. The name clicked into place. With a jolt of recognition. James Young, Samuel's father, the man who'd swept me off my feet at 19 and disappeared by the time I was 27, leaving me with a mortgage, a 5-year-old son, and a collection of broken promises. You're that Caroline, I said slowly, taking my seat. James mentioned you once or twice. I'm sure he did, and not only. Her smile turned. R.Y. James had a talent for making each new woman in his life believe all the previous ones were somehow defective. I didn't know how to respond to that. James had indeed painted his ex-girlfriends as clingy, demanding, unstable. All the things he later accused me of being when he left. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, Caroline continued, opening her menu. When I saw your article, I felt I'm not sure a connection. Perhaps a loose end that might need tying. And your son Kyle is the real estate agent working with Samuel, I said, pieces falling into place. Small world. Caroline's expression shifted slightly. Yes, that's actually part of why I wanted to meet. Kyle mentioned some concerns about the nature of Samuel's inquiries. The waiter approached to take our orders. Caroline selected a salad and sparkling water. I chose the same, suddenly not very hungry. When we were alone again, I asked, "What kind of concerns?" Caroline folded her hands on the table. He has been in real estate for 15 years. He has a good sense for when situations are ethically complicated. He felt uncomfortable with Samuel's questions about your property. "'Cause Samuel doesn't own my house," I replied. "Precisely," Caroline nodded. Initially assumed Samuel was acting on your behalf, but certain comments suggested otherwise. When the article mentioned you were Samuel's mother, Kyle connected the dots and came to me. I took a sip of water, processing this information. And the commission you mentioned in your letter, is that real or just a pretext? Oh, it's very real, Caroline assured me. My mother did pass away last month, and I do have her clothing. I've seen your work online. It's extraordinary. But yes, I admit I had another motivation for reaching out. Our salads arrived, giving me a moment to gather my but. Why was this woman essentially a stranger and one connected to a painful chapter in my past involving herself in my family matters, as if reading my thoughts? Caroline said quietly, James did to me what he later did to you. Left me for someone else. Claimed I was too much. Made me question my own perceptions. I was younger then. You were. No child involved. But it took me years to rebuild my sense of self. She speared a piece of lettuce, then set her fork down without eating. When Kyle told me about Samuel's behavior, I heard echoes of James, the entitlement, the manipulation, history repeating itself in the next generation. I felt a defensive response rise. Samuel wasn't James. The situations weren't comparable, but something stopped me. Hadn't I myself seen the calculation in Samuel's eyes? The assumption that my resources were his by right, the dismissal of my needs in favor of his own. Why are you telling me this? Asked finally. Caroline met my gaze directly. Because someone should have warned me about James, and no one did. Because I've spent 40 years wondering what happened to the girl he left me for. And because women our age should look out for each other. I felt something shift inside me, a recognition, a solidarity I hadn't expected. Caroline wasn't a rival from the past, but a predecessor on the same difficult path. Thank you, I said. Simply, she nodded, understanding in her eyes. Now shall we discuss this quilt properly? Mother had the most extraordinary collection of silk scarves. We spent the next hour talking about Caroline's mother's clothing, the possibilities for a memory quilt, and the stories behind particular pieces. By the time we finished our coffee, I'd agreed to take on the commission, and Caroline had shared valuable information about estate planning that her years as a family court judge had taught her. As we were leaving, Caroline touched my arm lightly. Rachel, may I offer one piece of unsolicited advice? I nodded. Curious. Don't let guilt guide your decisions. It rarely leads anywhere good. I carried her words with me all the way home, turning them over in my mind like smooth stones. Guilt had been my silent companion for decades. Guilt for not being enough for James to stay. Guilt for not giving Samuel a complete family. Guilt for every need of my own that competed with his. How many of my choices had been shaped by that guilt? How many boundaries had I failed to set because I felt I didn't deserve them? That evening, I received a text from Isla. The first direct communication from her since the wedding. Baby shower on Saturday. It would really mean a lot to Samuel if you could be there. We can put everything else aside for one day, can't we? For the baby. In the past, that appeal would have worked. I would have set aside my hurt, painted on a smile, and shown up bearing gifts, determined to prove I wasn't the difficult one. But Caroline's words echoed in my mind. Don't let guilt guide your decisions. Instead of immediately responding, I called Jessica. If you were planning to attend Isla's baby shower, I said when she answered, I'd appreciate if you could deliver something for me. Not going, Jessica asked, though she didn't sound surprised. No, I replied. I'm sending the quilt I made, but I won't be there myself. Good for you, Jessica said firmly. I'll drop it off. With a card. Anything particular you wanted to say? Thought for a moment. Just with love, Rachel. Nothing more. After hanging up, I texted Isla back. I've sent a gift with Jessica. Wishing you a wonderful shower. Simple, direct. No apologies. Her response came quickly. So you're really not coming? Samuel was. But you have changed. I set my phone down without replying. Yes, I had changed. And for the first time in a very long time, that change felt like growth rather than loss. The next morning I checked my email to find a message from an unfamiliar address. Megan met Wilson at Barrie Times and line com. The subject line read, interview request, feature on local artists. Dear Miss Young, my name is Megan Wilson and I'm a features writer for Barrie Times magazine. We're putting together a special issue on local artisans who have reinvented themselves in their second act of life, and your name came highly recommended. Would you be willing to be interviewed for our creators section? The piece would include professional photography of both you and your work with a focus on your journey from banking to textile arts. Please let me know if you'd be interested in participating. We're hoping to schedule interviews for early next month. Best regards, Megan Wilson. I stared at the screen, a mix of emotions washing over me. Pride at being recognized, uncertainty about being so public, a quiet thrill at the phrase second act of life, as if acknowledging that my story wasn't over, merely turning a page. Before I could talk myself out of it, I hit reply and accepted the invitation. I spent the morning working on Caroline's commission, carefully cataloging the scarves and clothing she'd brought over the day before. Each piece told a story. A silk scarf from Paris, a cashmere sweater worn thin at the elbows, a beaded evening purse from the 1960s. As I worked, I thought about legacies, about what we leave behind, about the objects that carry our essence after we're gone. My phone rang just after noon. Thomas, I was wondering if you might be free for dinner tonight, he said when I answered. Something came up yesterday that I'd like your advice on. We arranged to meet at his house the first time I'd been invited there. I drive over at 6, bringing a bottle of wine and the samples for Caroline's quilt in case Thomas had input on the design. His home was in an older neighborhood across town, a modest but well-maintained brick ranch with a beautifully landscaped garden. Thomas greeted me at the door, casually dressed in khakis and a soft blue button-down. I hope you like grilled fish, he said, leading me inside. It's about the only thing I can cook with any consistency. The interior was warm and inviting. Comfortable furniture, bookshelves lining one wall, family photos arranged on another. One corner of the living room held a baby grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the evening light. It was Helen's, Thomas said, noticing my gaze. She played beautifully. I keep it tuned, though no one plays it now. There was no sadness in his voice, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been. I found it touching that he kept this piece of his late wife present in his home, honored but not enshrined. Over dinner, which was indeed excellent, Thomas explained what he wanted my advice on. I've been asked to join the board of the community foundation, he said, refilling our wine glasses. It would mean a significant time commitment, but also the opportunity to direct resources to projects I believe in, like the Community Sense Arts program. You should absolutely do it, I said immediately. Your financial expertise would be invaluable, and the foundation needs people who understand the value of arts education. Thomas smiled, seeming pleased by my enthusiasm. I was hoping you'd say that. There's something else, though. He hesitated. If I take this position, I'd like to establish a small grant program for textile arts, and I'd like you to help design it. I set my fork down. surprised me. But I'm hardly an expert. I've only been teaching for a few months. Bring a perspective they need, Thomas insisted. You understand what it means to discover a creative voice later in life. How transformative that can be. His eyes met mine. How essential the word resonated through me. Essential. Not frivolous or indulgent or secondary. All words I'd unconsciously applied to my creative pursuits for years. Essential like breathing. Be honored, I said finally after dinner. We sat on his back porch with coffee, watching fireflies rise from the garden as darkness fell. The evening was warm, the conversation easy. When Thomas reached for my hand, it felt natural to let him take it. Rachel, he said, quietly, I want you to know that I'm not looking to replace what I had with Helen or what you had before. I'm too old to pretend one life can substitute for another. What are you looking for? He asked. He considered the question seriously. Companionship, joy where we can find it, a third act. Worth living. I smiled at the echo of the email I'd received that morning. Third act, I repeated. I like that when Thomas kissed me goodnight at my car. It felt like both an ending and a beginning, the gentle closing of one chapter and the opening of another yet to be written. Driving home, I found myself thinking of Samuel and Isla's baby shower, which would be happening in just few days. I imagined the scene: Patricia Phillips organizing games, Isla opening gifts, Samuel playing the proud father to be a tableau. I would have once been desperate to join, willing to accept any terms just to be included. Now I felt a curious detachment. Not indifference to the child, I was already imagining projects I might create for them, stories I might tell them someday, but distance from the performance of it all, the social obligations, the pretense, the careful dance around difficult truths. I wondered what Denise would include in her quilt square for this stage of recovery. Something about perspective, perhaps about seeing clearly from a distance. When I arrived home, there was a package on my porch, a small box wrapped in brown paper, no return address. Inside was an old envelope yellowed with age. My name written in a hand I recognized immediately. James's handwriting with trembling fingers. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated 25 years ago, just after Samuel had started college. Rachel, I know you have no reason to read this, much less believe anything I might say after all this. But Samuel graduates next month, and I find myself thinking of all I've missed, all I threw away when I left. Tell myself I was young, immature, not ready for responsibility. The truth is more selfish than that. I was a coward, and you and Samuel deserved better. I won't ask for forgiveness or for a place in your lives. But I want you to know that I recognize what you've accomplished raising our son alone, giving him everything I failed to provide. He is a testament to your strength, not my blood. I've enclosed a check that might help with his expenses. It's far too little too late, but it's what I can offer now. James, there was no check enclosed if there ever had been one. Was long gone. Nothing in the package explained how this letter had found its way to me now after all these years. But James sent it recently. Had someone found it among his effects? Was he even still alive? I set the letter aside, unsettled but not devastated. Time had dulled the sharp edges of that particular pain. What struck me most was the timing, this ghost from the past appearing just as I was stepping more firmly into my future. My phone buzzed with a text from Samuel. Mom, can we talk? Not about the shower. Something else. I hesitated before responding. I'm home tomorrow afternoon if you want to stop by. His reply came Quickly. See you at 2. I slept fitfully that night. Dreams filled with fragments of the past. James walking out the door with his suitcase. Samuel crying for his father. The lonely years of working and parenting and trying to be enough. In the dream, I was watching from a distance, as if observing someone else's life through a window. I woke feeling oddly peaceful, as if something long knotted inside me had finally begun to loosen. Samuel arrived precisely at 2 the next day. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, his usual confidence dimmed. He carried a canvas bag that he set carefully on the coffee table. Thanks for seeing me, he said, remaining standing even after I'd sat down. Of course, I replied. What's on your mind? He paced the living room once before, sitting on the edge of the couch. I've been doing some thinking about the wedding, about how we've been treating you, about the house. I waited, giving him space to continue. Ayla and I had a big fight after I was here last. He admitted about the shower, about you, about a lot of things. She said some stuff that made me think. He ran a hand through his hair. She said I was becoming my father. The words hung in the air between us. Thought of Caroline's observation about echoes, about patterns repeating. You're not your father, Samuel, I said quietly. Aren't I? He looked directly at me. Entitled selfish. Taking you for granted sounds pretty familiar. I shook my head. Your father left. We're here. Trying to have a difficult conversation. Already different. Samuel reached for the canvas bag, opening it carefully. Found these when we were packing for the move to the new house. I'd forgotten I even had them. He pulled out a stack of fabric. Not random pieces, but items I recognized immediately. The blanket I'd made for his first dorm room. The pillowcase embroidered with his college mascot. The tie I'd sewn for his first job interview. You kept these, I said, surprised. All of them, he confirmed, laying each piece on the coffee table. Everything you ever made for me. Even the stuff I pretended not to like. Because it wasn't cool enough for a teenager. I touched the edge of the dorm room blanket, remembering the nights I'd stayed up to finish it before he left, wanting him to have something of home in that strange new place. Don't know. When I started taking you for granted, Samuel continued. It happened so gradually I didn't notice, but looking at all these things, thinking about all the time and love that went into them. His voice cracked slightly. I've been in slump. I couldn't argue with that assessment, but I didn't affirm it either. Instead, I asked, what changed? Samuel was silent for a moment. Layla's pregnant, he said finally. I'm going to be a father, and suddenly I'm terrified of repeating patterns, of being to my child what my father was to me, or worse, what I've been to you lately. He looked down at his hands. I found out Kyle Bennett is Judge Bennett's son. She called me to her office yesterday. I raised my eyebrows, surprised. Caroline hadn't mentioned planning to confront Samuel. She told me about Dad, Samuel continued. About how he treated her. Then you about patterns of behavior. He met my and she showed me a letter from Dad to you, written when I was in college. Did you ever get it? I glanced at the side table where I'd placed James' letter the night before. Just last night. Actually, a strange coincidence. Not a coincidence, Samuel admitted. Judge Bennett had it. Apparently, Dad gave it to her for safekeeping years ago, afraid you'd throw it away if he sent it directly. She held on to it all this time, then decided I should see it before giving it to you. I tried to process this information. Caroline had orchestrated this entire sequence. Our lunch, the confrontation with Samuel, the delivery of James's letter. Why, as if reading my thoughts, Samuel said. She told me she was trying to break a cycle that sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see patterns we're too close to recognize. He leaned forward. Mom, I'm so sorry for the wedding, for the shower, for everything. I've been so focused on my new life with Isla that I forgot who helped me build the foundation for that life. The apology was sincere. Could see that. But something still felt unresolved. And Isla, I asked. How does she feel about all this? Samuel shifted. Uncomfortably. She's processing. She grew up differently than I did. Her family has a certain way of doing things. Expectations about status and appearances. It's been hard for her to understand our relationship. And the house. I pressed the inquiries. To Kyle Bennett. Samuel had the grace to look ashamed. That was wrong. Completely wrong. We got caught up in this idea of the perfect family home. And Isla's mom kept saying you'd probably want to downsize anyway. That it would be a win-win. He shook his head. No excuses. It was presumptuous and disrespectful. I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without needing to rub salt in the wound. And now we've bought a place across town, he said. Fixer-upper, but has good bones. We close next week. He hesitated. And I've told Isla that our relationship with you needs to change, that you deserve better from both of us. How did she take that? Samuel smiled slightly. Better than I expected, actually. Think the pregnancy has shifted her perspective, too. She's been asking questions about what you were like as a mother, about how you managed on your own. He looked at the pile of fabric items on the table. I told her about all this, about how you always found a way to make things special, even when money was tight. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest. Not the desperate need for approval I'd carried for so long, but a simpler pleasure in being seen, being remembered accurately. I'd like us to start over, Samuel said. Not pretending the past didn't happen, but building something better moving forward, especially with the baby coming. Considered his words carefully. The hurt of the wedding hadn't disappeared, nor had the weariness that had developed over months of feeling marginalized. But the person sitting before me now seemed more like the son I'd raised. Thoughtful, capable of growth, willing to acknowledge mistakes. Like that, too, I said finally. But it will take time and effort from both sides. Samuel nodded, relief visible in his expression. That's fair. More than fair. He glanced at his watch. Should go. Isla has a doctor's appointment in an hour. He stood, hesitating before adding, would you consider coming to dinner next week at the new house? Nothing fancy, just a new beginning. Mile. Like that. After Samuel left, I sat looking at the pile of fabric he'd returned. Tangible evidence of years of love expressed through my hands. Each piece held memories, some sweet, some bittersweet. Together they formed a kind of timeline of our relationship, not perfect, not without missing pieces and rough edges, but enduring. I thought of the baby quilt I'd finished, now on its way to the shower with Jessica. I'd created it during a time of hurt and distance. It still contained love in every stitch. Perhaps that was the truest testament to what it meant to be a mother. The ability to love through the difficult spaces, to create beauty even from pain. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Thinking of you today, dinner tomorrow. I smiled as I typed my reply. Yes, my place this time, I'll cook. Bennett. Message from Olivia magazine called about the feature. They want to shoot next week. You ready for your close-up, Ms. Young? And finally an email notification. A new order for my largest commission yet. A memorial quilt for a family who'd lost their patriarch, incorporating pieces from 6 decades of his life. I looked around my living room at the sewing projects stacked neatly in one corner, at the framed article above my desk, at the new business cards printed with our young textile artist. This space that had once been defined by what was missing: a husband, a complete family, was now filled with what I'd created: a business, a community, a self. The baby arrived 3 weeks early, a girl. 7 pounds, 2-0, with Samuel's chin and Isla's eyes. They named her Eliza Grace Young. And despite the lingering tensions, I was among the first people Samuel called. "She's perfect, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." I visited the hospital the next day, bringing a small gift, not the quilt which had been delivered at the shower, but a tiny knitted cap I'd made in the pastel colors Isla favored. I'd embroidered the baby's initials on the edge, a small personal touch. Isla was propped up in bed, looking tired but radiant. She nodded when I entered. Not quite welcoming but not hostile either. Progress of a sort. "Thank you for coming," she said formally. Samuel stood by the window, cradling the tiny bundle in his arms. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, come meet your granddaughter." He placed Eliza in my arms with careful instructions about supporting her head. She was warm and impossibly small, her face peaceful in sleep. I felt the familiar surge of love that had overwhelmed me when Samuel was born. That fierce protective instinct that transcends all logic. "She's beautiful," I whispered, touching one perfect miniature finger. "Absolutely beautiful." "We got your quilt," Isla said after a moment. "It's exquisite. I've never seen anything like it." Looked up, surprised by the genuine admiration in her voice. "Thank you. Glad you like it. My mother wanted to know where we bought it," she continued with a small smile. "She couldn't believe it was handmade. She's been showing photos to all her friends." Patricia Phillips, impressed by something I'd created. The thought was almost comical. "The nursery is finished," Samuel added. "We'd love for you to see it when you have time. The quilt is the centerpiece. We designed everything else around it." Handed Eliza back to him, watching as he adjusted her blanket with careful attention. In that moment I saw not the entitled young man who dismissed me at his wedding, but the boy I'd raised, caring, gentle, capable of growth. Like that, I say, see. The visit was brief but cordial, a tentative step toward whatever our new relationship would be. As I was leaving, Isla called my name. "Rachel," she said, using my first name for perhaps the first time. Would you be willing to teach me how to sew? Nothing fancy, just basics. I'd like to make things for Eliza as she grows." The request caught me off guard. "Of course," I replied after a moment. "Whenever you're ready." Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because everything was resolved, there were still conversations to be had, boundaries to establish, trust to rebuild, but because something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer fighting to be included or acknowledged. I was being invited in on terms that recognized my value. The following week, Megan Wilson from Barry Times magazine arrived at my home with a photographer. They spent hours photographing my workspace, my finished pieces, my hands at work on Caroline's quilt. Megan's questions were thoughtful, focusing not just on my techniques, but on the journey that had brought me to this point. What would you say to other women who feel they've lost themselves in family roles? She asked as we sat at my kitchen table. I considered the question carefully. I'd say that nothing is ever truly lost. Sometimes, parts of ourselves go dormant, waiting for the right conditions to grow again. And I'd say it's never too late to become who you might have been. The article was published the following month, a 6-page spread with the headline, "The Thread That Connects Rachel Young's Journey from Mother to Artist." The photos were beautiful, capturing not just my work but something of the spirit behind it. The patience, the attention to detail, the honoring of what had come before. Orders flooded in after the publication, more than I could possibly accept. Began keeping a waiting list and raised my prices to reflect the true value of my time and expertise. No one complained. If anything, the demand increased. Olivia suggested I take on an apprentice. "You can't keep working these hours," she said during one of our regular coffee meetings. "You need help, and there are plenty of people who would love to learn from you." I thought of Denise, who had completed her divorce quilt with a final square she called New Horizon, a sunrise pattern in vibrant colors. Thought of the young mother from our sewing group, who had started creating children's clothes with scraps from her own outgrown garments. I thought of Isla, who had attended one lesson so far, struggling with basic stitches, but determined to continue. "You're right," I said to Olivia. "It's time to expand." That same day, I received a call from the Community Foundation. They were establishing the Textile Arts Grant program Thomas had proposed with funding for classes, materials, and mentorship opportunities. They wanted me to serve as the program's first director. It would mean developing curriculum, selecting participants, overseeing projects. The board chair explained. A significant commitment, but one we believe would benefit the entire community. I accepted without hesitation. Thomas took me to dinner to celebrate, beaming with pride when I told him the news. Our relationship had deepened over the months, comfortable, supportive without the desperate intensity of youth, but with a steadiness I'd never known before. "Have something for you," he said as we finished dessert. He handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a beautiful silver thimble, clearly antique, with delicate engraving around the band. "Was Helen's grandmother's," Thomas explained. "Helen would have wanted it used, not stored away as a memorial. When I saw you working on that difficult section of Caroline's quilt last week, I thought of it. I was touched beyond words, not just by the gift itself but by the thought behind it, the acknowledgement that things meant to be used should be used, that life was for the living." "I'll treasure it," I said, simply. The next day, I hung a sign beside my porch light. "Studio of our young textile artist, not for show but for truth." The daffodils bloomed early that year, and the air held that soft warmth that makes you forget winter was ever cruel. I baked lemon muffins, not cake, and set out a small table under the awning. No RSVP list, no dress code. Just whoever wanted to come. Denise brought iced coffee. Hannah, the young mother from the sewing group, brought her toddler and a sketchbook filled with designs. Olivia arrived with fabric samples for the upcoming class. Thomas came later, bringing Caroline Bennett, who had become a friend as well as a client. Samuel and Isla stopped by. Briefly, Eliza sleeping peacefully in her carrier. They didn't stay long. They had dinner plans with Isla's parents, but their presence felt like a bridge being rebuilt, one careful plank at a time. We didn't talk about missing people or past hurts. We talked about plans, about books we hadn't finished, about fabric, dye and color theory. No one interrupted. No one performed. One point, Olivia asked about my family, gesturing toward the door where Samuel and Isla had just left. I smiled and said, "Still in progress." That answer didn't feel empty anymore. Later that night, I tidied up slowly, folded the chairs, washed the mugs, left the sign on the porch, lit glowing soft gold against the dark. Inside, I passed the shelf where I kept the wedding RSVP. The flap still sealed, tape yellowed slightly at the edges. I used to pause there every time I walked by, let my fingers rest on the envelope like it might still offer something. Now I reached for it one last time, holding it briefly before placing it in the recycling bin, not as a gesture of forgiveness or forgetting, but of moving forward, of choosing what to carry and what to set down. The house was quiet around me, filled with projects in various stages of completion. Caroline's quilt spread across my work, awaiting final touches. A small jacket for Eliza that I was embroidering with tiny birds. Fabric samples for the grant program, labeled and organized by texture and weight. On my desk sat a letter from the editor of a national craft magazine, inquiring about a possible feature. Beside it, an invitation to speak at a regional textile arts conference and a card from Thomas. Its message simple but profound to the journey ahead. I no longer waited for invitations from people who never meant to include me. I no longer explained my absence or justified my presence. The sign on the porch said enough. The name was mine, and it stayed even after others had stopped using it. I looked around the room at the evidence of a life rebuilt, at the threads connecting past to present to future. Not perfect, not without visible seams or occasional crooked stitches, but authentic, whole. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after loss or disappointment? Comment below. If you enjoyed this story, check out The Inheritance He Never Expected and When She Found Her Voice. 2 other stories that channel viewers love. The story continues in the next chapter in the next linked video. But first, I need you to subscribe to join the family as we are looking forward to hit our first 10,000 subscribers target, and feel free to share your story in the comments. You matter, your voice does too.